Thank you very much. Shalom Aleichem, everybody. There are two different Mesichtas. One is Kiddushin and one is Kesubos. Kiddushin is all about Erisin, and Kesubos is all about Nisuin. There are two parts to the marriage ceremony. First is Erisin, and then is Nisuin. Halacha Lamaisa, there are many differences between an Arusa and an Nesua. The Gemara in the first parak in Kiddushin raises a question. There are three ways to make Erisin, either Kesef or Shtar or Bia. And the Chachamim prohibited Kiddushi Bia. But in Torah, that's a legitimate way to make Erisin. So the Gemara raises the question, if a man is Mekadosh and Isha Bia, do you say Bia Erisin Oise, but she's only an Arusa, she's not an Asua? Do you say no? Maybe Bia is Nisuin Hu Oise. Maybe he does everything. The Gemara says, what's the difference, halacha lamaisa, between Arusa and an Asua? So the Gemara rattles off right away three differences: liyarsha, or letamela, or lahafei nidareha. Liyarsha, there's a din that abal yaresh es ishta. If the wife predeceases the husband, then the husband yarshins. If the husband dies, the wife does not yarshin the husband. She's entitled to the ksubah. Ksubah is an awful lot of money. But if the wife dies first, then the husband yarshins. That's a machlekes hatanoim, whether that's a din midiraisa midirabanan, habal yoresh es ishtay. As a machlekes halacha lamaisa, the Rambam and the Ravid. There are a few slight nafkaminas, whether it's deraisa derabanan. So halacha lamaisa, it's machlekes. The Rambam paskin habal yoresh es ishtay is only midirabanan, and the Ravid paskins that it's deraisa. So that's liyorsha. L'tamei law is a din for kohanim. A kohen is not permitted to be metamei to any mace, unless it's one of the seven relatives. So one of the seven relatives is Ishtay. If the wife dies, the husband is Muchayiv to be Metamei. So the Rambam writes, as if he's quoting a Gemara, the Rambam writes that din that Habal Metamei LeIshtay is only Midirabanan. The Gemara says on the pasuk in the beginning of Parshas Amor, Nefesh Leitama Be'avav Kim L'Sheira HaKoraveilov, L'Sheira is a Ishtay. So the Rambam assumes that that's only an asmachta, that Habal Metamei LeIshtay is only Midirabanan. How can it be? We have a discussion in Yevamis on Daf Tzadik, a long discussion, 3 blot Gemara, where the Yesh Kerach B'Yad Chachamim, let's say if Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, so in Torah you're obligated to blow shofar, and with the Rabbanan they prohibit us from blowing shofar. So that's called Yesh Kerach B'Yad Chachamim, L'Akadav Min Torah B'Shei B'Al Tasad, and tell us not to fulfill the mitzvah of shofar. Do they have authority, even Yesh Kerach L'Akar Afilu B'Kum V'Yasei? Do they have the ability to allow an Eshes Ish to remarry? So the Maskana, it's a machlokes in the Gemara. The Maskanas are Babli, after 3 blot Gemara, is that no. Ekach B'Yad Chachamim, L'Akadav Min Torah B'Kum V'Yasei. Only B'Shei V'Al Tasad. So how can it be, the Rambam asks, how can it be that Habal Metamei LeIshtay is only Midirabanan? How can the Chachamim permit a Kohen to be Metamei LeIshtay if Min Torah it's Aser? And Koach L'Akadav B'Kum V'Yasei. So the Rambam says that they declared Ishta as if she's a Meis Mitzvah. The husband is not going to attend his wife's funeral. It'll look as if they never had Shalom Bayis. It'll be a Bizayin HaMeis. So the Ravid asks, what in the world is he talking about? The din, the Ravid argues with the Rambam, Habal Metamei LeIshtay is a din in Torah. That explanation that the Gemara gave, that if the husband won't be Metamei, it'll be a Bizayin HaMeis. It'll look as if they didn't get along. There wasn't Shalom Bayis. The Gemara gives that in one case of Habal Metamei LeIshtay. If a Kohen married a girl who is a Ktana and the father is not alive, so the father can be Mekadosh Bito Ktana. Min Torah, the father can be Mekadosh the daughter if he's alive, but if he died, he can't. And the mother and all of her classmates are married already. The girl is only 11 and a half years old. They don't want to be an old maid, so everybody's married already. She's the only old maid in the class. She's only 11 and a half years old. So they gave the Chacham gave the mother, Ima v'yacheha, if the mother picks a chassan for her, or if the older brothers are mature and they pick a husband, so she's only married midrabanan. So if the wife dies, the husband is metamei. So Gemara says, "But in koach la'akav bikum v'yasei." How can they permit the kohen to be metame to his wife. Min HaTorah, it's not his wife. He's not married at all. It's only Kedusha Midrabanan. So the Gemara says, Asuha Kameis Mitzvah in that case. Because if not going to be metame, people will say that they didn't get along. There was no Shalom Bayis. But not that the whole din about Baal Metame L'Ishta is Midrabanan. That's what the Rav asks, where did the Rambam get this idea from? That a Baal Metame L'Ishta is only Rabbanan. There is no such Gemara. The Gemara only says it on the case where it's only Ishta Midrabanan. When it's Ishta Min HaTorah, that the Baal is Metame Min HaTorah. It's like a question, where did the Rambam get it from? So the Rogachover writes in one place, what was the Machlokes HaTanaim with the Baal Yoresh Ishtoi? Why? How come the Rambam Pascha Baal Yoresh Ishtoi is only Midrabanan? It was Machlokes HaTanaim and Bava Basra Perek Yeshnochlin. So the svara behind saying that it doesn't make sense the husband should yarshin the wife Min HaTorah is that the minute the wife dies, they're no longer married. My father passed away, so he's my father even after he died. My brother, I never had a brother, but if I had a brother, the brother would die, so we're still brothers even after he dies. But if a couple is married and one of them dies, so that's the end of the issues. How can you say that Abal Yoresh is Ishtoi Min HaTorah? So the Rambam L'Shitasai, who paskin that Abal Yoresh is Ishtoi, is only by the Rabbanon, because it does make sense. After the wife died, that's the end of the marriage. So they're not related anymore. So for the same reason, the Rambam understood that even though the Gemara never records it, there must have been a Machlokes HaTanoim regarding Habal Metame L'Ishtoi, whether that's Min HaTorah or not. So the Shitasa that the Rambam paskin Habal Yoresh Ishtoi is only by the Rabbanon, so he paskin that Habal Metame L'Ishtoi is only by the Rabbanon, and for the explanation that the Gemara gave, Asuha Kameis Mitzvah. So the Gemara says these three nafkaminas. The Gemara in Kiddushin in the first parak had the shaila whether if a man is Mekadosh and Isha, Kiddushay Bia, whether Bia is Eris and Isa or Nisu and Isa. So the Gemara said, what's the nafkamina between Arus and Nisu? L'yorsha l'tamila or l'hafin l'dereh. So it could be that l'yorsha l'tamila are both only midirabbanan. The whole nafkamina is only midirabbanan, according to the Rambam. They're both midirabbanan. But l'hafin l'dereh, that's a din min HaTorah. That if the girl is a naira hamurasa, that's the name of a perik. And the end of Maseches Nedar, Perek Naira Hamarasa. So the opening mission says Naira Hamarasa, Aviu Abayla Mefirim Nedereha. They have to both be Mefer B'Shutfis. The husband, the Orus, he only has Eris and he doesn't have Nisuin. So you need the Orus has to be Mefer and the father has to be Mefer together. If one is Mefer without the other, then the Dorim is still binding. But if she's already an Isua, then the Bal is Mefer Nedereha. So the Gemara rattles off these three nafkaminas. There's another nafkamina, and Eshes Isha Zinsa is Chayiv Misa. So if she's a Naira Hamu Urasa, then the Torah says that she gets Skila. And if she's an Isua, then she gets Chenek. That's a big difference. It's a big difference. What are some other differences between Arusa and Isua? So on the first daf, the Gemara talks about the fact, let's say, a Kohen can eat Truma. A non-Kohen cannot eat Truma. What if a girl is not from a family of Kohanim and she marries a Kohen? So that's, the Gemara says, Ben HaTorah, she can eat Truma, even Erison. But with the Rabbanon, they prohibited, from one of two reasons, they prohibited Arusa from eating Truma. It's a Gzera with the Rabbanon, we'll have to discuss it when you learn the first daf, Beis Amar Aleph. So the Gemara quotes a pasuk. How do you know that if the girl is only arusa lekoyin, that she's ocheles b'truma? Where's the pasuk? So the Gemara digs up a pasuk. Koyin ki ikna nefesh kinyan kaspo. So the pasuk shot the pasuk goes behemas koyin, or nevet kanayni shel koyin is ochel b'truma. Behemas koyin is ocheles b'truma. The Gemara says included in kinyan kaspo is also if a koyin was mekadosh and isha with kiddushay kesef. How do you know Kedusha Ishtar, Kedusha Bia also? So the Gemara explains that too. So you have a pasuk. They dug up a pasuk. Kohen kik the nefesh kinyan kaspoy. That if the Kohen has Eris in his wife, she's acheles b'truma min HaTorah. But with the Rabbanan, there are two reasons why she's not acheles b'truma. So Rashi in Kiddushin Yudam and Beis asks Akasha, why did the Gemara make such a pilpul about this? How do you know that Eish is Kohen acheles b'truma? The Sifrei has a drasha on the pasuk called Torah b'veischa yochal kodesh. And the Sifrei says that Beis Zu Ishtoi. Beis Zu Ishtoi. So you have a pasuk called Davar Beis Chol Kodesh that Eishes Koin Acheles Betruma. So why did the Gemara need another pasuk? Koin Kin Nefesh Kenyan Kaspo. So Rashi answers in Kiddush and Yudam and Beis that the idea of Beis Zu Ishto, that expression, that terminology, that Beis Zu Ishto, only applies after Nisuin. During Erusin, she's not called Beisa. How did Rashi have the Ruach HaKodesh to know that? That Beis Zu Ishto only applies to Nisua? The answer is it's not Ruach HaKodesh, it's a Gemara in Yuma. The first Mishnah in Yuma says the Kohen Gadol has to be married on Yom Kippur. Because it says in the Chumash, he has to ask Mechila, the Chipa Ba'ado Ubiyad Beisa. He has to say Vidui on his own behalf, Ba'ado Ubiyad Beisa, Beisa Zu Ishto. He has to be married. So Gemara says, what degree marriage does he have to have? Is it sufficient with Erusin, or do you need Nisuin? Gemara says, Beisa Zu Ishto only applies after Nisuin. During Erusin, it's not called Beisa Zu Ishto. That's where Rashi got it from. The Beisa Zu Ishto only applies after Nisuin. The Pashta says that that's the difference and definition between Arusa and Nisua. Arusa is an Eshes Ish Shalo B'Beis HaBaal, and Nisua is an Eshes Ish B'Beis HaBaal. So to create Ishus, you need Hoisha Niknas, you need a Kinyan. The Chalois is not a Kinyan. The husband doesn't have a Kinyan on his wife, not a Kinyan Mama, not a Kinyan Isa. It's a Chalois Ishus. But the Chalois Ishus comes about with a Maisi Kinyan. Kesef and Shtarabiyah are Kinyanim. That's the opening Mishnah in Kiddushin. Hoisha Niknas B'Shalosh Rachim. It's a Maisi Kinyan that creates a Chalois Ishus. So we used to have a Rebbe here in the Yeshiva, Rab Nissen Alpert, Zachan Lerach. So he gave a mashal over here. He said in Bava Metzia, in the first parak, the Yeshiva learned Bava Metzia last zeman. So the Gemara alludes to a machlokes of Yechon and Reish Lakish. If I have property but it's stolen and I don't know where it is, my wife has a car that was stolen twice. And the third time they stole only the door. 3 times they stole. One time I was walking to the yeshiva to Damashachris, and I see our car with 3 doors, and the 4th door was missing. Got off and needed a door. So they walked off with the door. And twice they stole the whole car. So if the car was stolen, you don't know where it is. So the Gemara said, that's Shali, the Ene B'Shusi. So is that a full bailus or not? So that's a machlekes of Yechon and Reish Lakish. And we paskin, whenever there's a machlekes of Yechon and Reish Lakish, the Gemara says, over the years they took a consensus, and the majority of the Amoraim voted in favor of Rabbi Yochanan in most cases, except for 3 cases where we pass like Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan. So most of the time, the overwhelming majority of the cases we pass like Rabbi Yochanan, and in 3 rare cases we pass like Reish Lakish. So we pass if I own property, I own a behemoth, I own an automobile, and it's stolen, I don't know where it is. The police called us up later. They told us where it is. There's a church on Bennett Avenue that serves on the weekends as a Reform temple and has a female rabbi, female Rebbitzin. So they stole our car and they parked it in the back of the church. So the police called us up. They told us we're trespassing. Our car is parked on someone else's parking lot. Okay. But Kozma, we didn't know where it is. So the Gemara calls it Shali ve'ene b'shusi. So we pass like Rabbi Yochanan, something that's ain't a b'shusi, my bailus is incomplete. I can't be mafkerit, I can't be magdashit, I can't sell it. If it's my sosheni, I can't be paida it. If I want to make a neder to aser on someone else, I can't aser it on someone else because it's not fully shali. Full ownership is shaloi b'shusai. That's where Rav Alpert gave as a mashal, not a strong mashal, a mashal. There's an eshes ish b'veis habal, that's an esua. There's an eshes ish shalo b'veis habal. It's a little bit like dini mominus, that if I own property, bailus. If I own property, shali b'shusi, it's a full bailus. And shali v'ene b'shusi, it's not a full bailus. So an eshes ish b'veis habal is a full ish. That's called nisuin. So how do you make nisuin? So you make nisuin, you don't need a new kinyan. You don't need to make erisin, to make kiddushin and erisin, the same thing. To make kiddushin, you say hoisha niknis b'shalosh drachim. You need a ma'aseh kinyan, either a ma'aseh kesef, shtar, or bia. It's a ma'aseh kinyan that doesn't create a halos kinyan, not a kinyan mama, not a kinyan iser, but it creates an ishus. So to create erisin, you need a kinyan. To create nisuin, you don't need a new kinyan. You just need hachnasa l'rishuso. How exactly does one accomplish hachnasa l'rishuso? So so in Shulchan Aruch there are different opinions. So there's one opinion that's quoted of all places at the end of Yeridea. Yeridea ends with the laws of Avelus. So the Gemara has a discussion here on Daf Dalet Amud Aleph. Every so often this comes up. They're about to make a wedding today, tomorrow, and one of the parents dies. So what do? The chos and kala, someone's in the middle of Shiva. So what do? You make the chos, you make the wedding in the middle of Shiva. The Gemara discusses some details over here. So if you look in Yeridea, at the end of Yeridea, where they have these dinim of Avelis, Meisavib Shalchas and Ema Shalgala, it's an important discussion in the Gemara. Unfortunately, it happens every so often. You have to know the dinim. So there, in Yeridea, the Ramah quotes an opinion from the Balei HaTosfos. We don't have it in Tosfos on the Daf, but the Mordechai quotes it, that the Badekin constitutes the Nisuin. When the Chosin, not all communities do a Badekin. The Yakkis don't do a Badekin, do they? They do a Badekin. Oh. But other communities don't do a Badekin. Badekin means the Chosin goes to the Kala and he puts the veil over her head. What is that based on? It's based on the pasuk. Where does it come from? The whole idea. Based on the pasuk in Megillah Rus, that Rus says, "Farasta kanafecha ala masecha." You should marry me. So that's a lashon for nisuin. When you put your beged on the girl, that's an act of hachnasa l'rishusa. Doesn't look like a ma'aseh kinyan. Kesef is kind of alma, but kind of by kiddushin. Shtar is kind of, in other cases, kind of kan. Kiddushin bia is a question whether kiddushin bia is a ma'aseh kinyan. The only thing that it's kind of is by ishus, not kind of anything else. Kesef is kind of, in other cases, it's kind of kan. Shtar is kind of be alma, but kind of kan. Bia is not kind of anywhere else. That's why the Yerushalmi is of the opinion that kiddushin bia is not at all a ma'aseh kinyan. It's a ma'aseh ishus, and even a cherish can have kiddushin deraisa in a woman if he does kiddushin bia. But so the Nebuchadnezzar Yosef quotes that there's a perik in the end of Yivamis that's called perik cherish. So the Nebuchadnezzar Yosef on perik cherish quotes that from the Talmud Yerushalmi, and in Even Ezer they quoted la halacha. This opinion of the Nebuchadnezzar Yosef that if a cherish means the person is retarded. Al pidin is a la bardas. Cherish haytevikotin is a la bardas. So we usually assume a cherish haytevikotin is never married min haTorah. The kiddushin, he's a la bardas. He can't be mekadosh and isha min haTorah. And then Nebuchadnezzar Yosef quotes this Yerushalmi as if it's not contradicting. Pashto is that it's in contradiction to the Bavli. So that's a problem with that. The Nebuchadnezzar Yosef. How can it be? How can it be that a cherish has kiddushin deraisa if it's kiddushin bia? So again, so the different opinions, how do you do nisuin? So one opinion is the farasta kanafecha lamasecha. When the chosin does the badek and he covers the kala's face, that constitutes hachnasa l'rishusa. The problem is that we do the badek and before we march down the aisle. So how can you make her an isur before she's an arusa? First you have to do erisin and make her an eshes ish. And then you do hachnasa l'rishusa, she becomes an eshes ish b'veis habal. But how can you do hachnasa l'rishusa before you did the erisin? So the Mishnah Lamelech, on the bottom of the page in the Rambam, raises that issue, and it quotes sources that it is legitimate. You can't do nisuin before we do erisin. We do it all the time. Chos and kala match under the chuppah, and the Ramon Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Rishonim that standing under the canopy, standing under the chuppah is the nisuin. So they do the nisuin before they even did the erisin. So the Mishnah Melech quotes sources. Tshuva by Rashi is quoted by the Mordechai that if you do the nisuin before the erisin, you don't have to repeat the nisuin. When you do the erisin, she jumps 2 steps. Usually you go 1 step at a time. The pnuya is converted into an eshes ish, and then when you do the nisuin, the eshes ish, a little bit beis habal, is converted into an asur. She becomes an eshes ish beis habal. But here Rashi has this tshuva that if you do chuppah before you gave the ring, so nothing is chal at all. But if and when he gives the ring, then she jumps 2 steps at once. From a penuya, she jumps to become an eshes beveis habal. Both happen at the same time. The problem is, though, that when they're standing under the chuppah, so when he gives her the ring, they're still standing under the chuppah. So they did the act of walking under the chuppah before the ring was given, before the kedushin, but she's still standing under the chuppah. So the nisuin is still kayam. Not that he did nisuin, they walk away. By the badekin, when they do the badekin, does the kala keep the veil on until she marches down the aisle? Usually they don't. Usually they uncover their face. I have a sister, so Rav Hershel Schachter was a Masada Kedushin when my sister got married. So he told her when the chosin did the badekin, she should leave the veil down until after they go to the yichud room. He never discussed it in Shiur, I don't remember, but it makes sense. If you're doing nisuin before Eresin, it makes sense if the act of nisuin is still there. They walked under the canopy, they walked under the chuppah, and they're still there when he gives her the ring. So then the nisuin takes effect after the Eresin. But if the chosin does about that, and then she uncovers her face, and then later on she covers her face on her own, so that's not the nisuin of the chosin. That's a question. That's a question. Anyway, so there are different opinions what constitutes nisuin. So one opinion is the badekan is nisuin, and that's quoted by the Ramah in the end of Yoreh Deah. In Hilchos Avelos, when they talk about the din of Meisav v'shal chosin, Ima shal kala, so they talk about badekan constituting nisuin. The Nari B'Yehuda has comments that are printed on the side of the page, and the big Shulchan Aruch is called the Dogol Mervava. So there's a long Dogol Mervava there on that Ramah in the end of Yoreh Deah, where he writes that there were different communities in Europe, different countries in Europe. In some countries, the chosin didn't do the badekan at all. Chosin stayed by the chosin's tish, and the Rabbanim went to do the badekan. So what is that all about? So the Dogol Mervava says, it's self-understood that the chosin appoints the Rabbanim as the shliach to do the badekan on his behalf. Just like he can make a shliach to be mekadosh an isha, so he can make a shliach to do badekan as well. So Rav Soloveitchik didn't agree with that Nari B'Yehuda. He said to him, it doesn't make any sense at all. Let's say the chosin can be mekadosh like the shliach by kedusha kesef and shtar. Can he be mekadosh like the shliach like the bia? It's the wrong person doing the bia. So he said, what do you mean? This is hachnasa l'rishuso. It's not an act of kinyan. It's not that Eresin is kind of mixas ishus and Nisun is kind of the rest of the ishus. Nisun is just hachnasa l'rishuso. She becomes an eshes ish beveis habal. So he thought that it's not mistaber at all, that you can make a shliach for Nisun. Rav Soloveitchik often, when he would attend a wedding, he would go with the chosin to the badekin, and then usually what happens is the chosin doesn't know anything about the veil, doesn't know what he's supposed to do. Usually the mother of the kala holds the veil and she does the badekin. The chosin puts his finger on it, but usually the mother does. Rabbi Soloveitchik would always scream out loud, and the mother should not hold on to the veil, because you can't have a shliach. He didn't explain under the chuppah, he didn't explain it there, but in Shiur he explained, you can't have a shliach. He didn't agree with the Nari B'Yehuda. So they said the chosin has to do the badekin all by himself. He thought it doesn't make sense to appoint a shliach for nisuin. Hachnasa l'rishus is not a ma'aseh kinyan. We'll get back to the topic. Just meanwhile, there are many differences between arusa and nesua. We said l'yosha l'tamya l'elahof and the dereha, and we said midirabbanan. There's a din that she's zeno achelos betruma. We'll have to discuss what's the reason for that. And there's a difference in the chiyuv einish misas bezin. By a naira hamarasa, it's beskila, and by nesua, eshes is bechenek. There's another difference between arusa and nesua, that minatayra sherik susa ve'nasa lo yigra, the balas chayiv b'mezonis ishtoi. We'll have to learn the Mesichta to see whether that's the Raisa the Rabbanan. A Baal Chai b'zonis ishtoi. Ona, the husband is mechuyev to sleep with his wife, marital relations. So So the Chiyuv of Sher Ksus V'Yoina only begins after Nisuin. Everybody agrees to that. There's no Chiyuv of Sher Ksus V'Yoina by an Arusa. So there is a Gemara, Anun Vav Amid Aleph. You take a look when you have a chance. There is a din, Masna Mashakos about Torah, Tanai Botla Maisekayim. So take, for example, a boy marries a girl, and he's gone to the army, and he knows he can get killed. He knows he may never have a chance to have any children. He's gone to the army right after the chuppah. The same night he's gone to the army. So his wife is going to need chalitza. If he gets killed, she's going to need chalitza. She doesn't need a pain in the neck to have chalitza. And if he was killed in the army, an almana is permitted to marry a kohen. An almana is not allowed to marry a kohen gadol, but she's allowed to marry a kohen hedyot. But if she has chalitza, that's like a grusha. A grusha is asur l'kohen min haTorah, and a chalutza is asur l'kohen midrabanan. That's what the Gemara shows from our Mishnah. Chalutza is asur l'kohen midrabanan. So he doesn't want his wife to become a chalutza. So he says, "Harei mukadeshes li," on the condition that if I die, believe on him, you don't need to have any chalitza. And if I'll need chalitza, I don't want to be mekadosh you. So the din is, that's called masna mashakos b'Torah. That's the example that the Yerushalmi gives for the din of masna mashakos b'Torah, and it's quoted in the Shulchan Aruch. The boy says, "Harei mukadeshes li," on the condition that the laws of chalitza and yibum shouldn't apply. If I should die, leaving no children, bein ein law, so then she shouldn't need chalitza. So the din is that the kedushin is chal and the tanai is batla mevutal. She's mekodeshes, and if he does die, she will need chalitza. So what's the din of masna? Not everybody agrees to. Masna mashakos b'Torah, tanai batla ma'asekaim. The kedushin is chal and the tanai is not chal. What if he makes a tanai b'dovisha b'mamen? Sher uksus. That's the Gemara on Nun Vav Amid Aleph in Yevamis. It's a machlokes. And it's a machlokes Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda. Usually Rav Meir, Rav Yehuda, alochik Rav Yehuda, so we pass like Rav Yehuda. That b'dovish b'mamen tanai kaim. Kol tanai b'mamen kaim. The Rambam writes, let's say, stam halva shloshim yom. That's stam halva. What if I lend you a halva and I say, but I want it tomorrow. I want you to pay me back the money tomorrow. So you have to pay back tomorrow. The Rambam says, why? Because we pass like Rav Yehuda. They're called Tanai Shebimam Kayim, and there's no din on Masa Mashakos b'Torah, but Dovish Shebimam. So the Gemara presents the machlokes Rav Meir Rav Yehuda. If a man is Mekadosh and Isha Harei Mekudeshes Li, Almanah She'en Lo Chalai Sher Ksus V'Yoina. That's 6 lines from the bottom of Nun Vav Amid Aleph and Kesubos. Rav Soloveitch gets, what do you mean Harei Mekudeshes Li? No Arusa has Sher Ksus V'Yoina. Sher Ksus V'Yoina only begins after Nisuin. So what do you mean? He says Harei Mekudeshes Li. Almanas that are not, you don't have to make such a tanai. When you make Kedushin, no one is Mechuyev and Sher Ksus V'Yoina. You should make the tanai when he does the Nisuin, not when he does the Erisin. The Sher Ksus V'Yoina doesn't set in till they make the Nisuin. Rav Soloveitch said, no. According to the Dogel Mervava, according to the Rabbi Yehuda, you can make a shliach to do Nisuin. So Rav Soloveitch thought it doesn't make sense, like making a shliach to do Kedusha Bia. The Gemara said you can't make a shliach. It's like a mitzvah shebegufa. It's the wrong person. What do you mean? Hachnosa l'ushusa. It's the wrong person doing the hachnosa l'ushusa. Has to be davka the husband. So he said the only way to make such a tanai is if you make the tanai in the isha, in the erison. The Gemara has a klal milsa de leisa b'shlichas leisa b'tanai. If there is an issue that you can't appoint a shliach, you can't make a tanai. Let's say taka chalitza. For many years, no one could get into Russia, no one could get out of Russia. There was an iron curtain. That's what it was known, an iron curtain. So there were cases that a couple lived in Eretz Yisrael, anywhere in the world, and the brother of the husband is still behind the iron curtain, is still in Russia, and the husband dies, believe on him, and the Yavam can't come to Eretz Yisrael, and the Yavam can't travel to Russia. They didn't let anybody in, they didn't let anybody out. So it's impossible. You can't make a shliach. You cannot do chalitza al-yedei shliach. So the Gemara has a klal, milsa, because he can't do chalitza al-yedei shliach, he can also not make a tanai. Let's say the brother of the Yavam is very nice. He says, I'll do the chalitza, but I'll do the chalitza ala tanai. If you pay me $100,000 within a month, the chalitza should be valid. And if you don't pay the money, a chalitza should not be valid. So the Gemara says you cannot make a tanai. Whatever you're not a bailam on the chalois, if you're not a bailam on the chalois, then you can't make a shliach and you can't make a tanai. So that's what Rav Soloveitchik thought. He thought the Nadi Behuda was not correct. He thought you cannot make a shliach for nisuin, therefore you cannot make a tanai either. So how's the fellow going to make? He can't do the nisuin ala tanai. He has to make the erisin ala tanai. He says haret mukudeshesli, and after kedusha, no one is chayv in shek susviyana. But he says haret mukudeshesli, an incomplete issues that should never lead to shek susviyana. Normally, when you have a normal issues, after you do nisuin, there'll be a chiyuv shek susviyana. So haret mukudeshesli al manash enoch alai shek sus. So then we pass from Davish and Imam, and tonight we pass like Rabbi Yehuda. There is a difference between Eishes Kohen Acheles Betruma and Eishes Kohen Acheles because of a sheikh. Whenever you bring a shlamim, so the shlamim is nechal to the bailim, has to be tohar. He has to go to mikveh, and he can invite whoever he wants, Jewish people, to eat the shlamim. They have to make sure that they're tahor. But the chaz of the sheikh of the shlamim goes to the kohanim, and the Mishnah says, Amor bahem ke'etzamem shamor nechal kohanim l'shem levneim le'avdem. That Eshes Kohen is permitted to eat chaz of the sheikh also. Just like Eshes Kohen is permitted to eat truma, Eshes Kohen is permitted to eat chaz of the sheikh. And Evet Kohen also. Hamur Mahem Ketzabem Shamam Nachal Koinim L'Nshem L'Evneim L'Avdeim. The Ebed Kanaini Evet Kohen can also be Echel B'Chas of a Sheikh. So the Pasuk has a din Bas Kohen Kisir Li'Ishzar. If a Bas Kohen, a Kohenis, marries a non-Kohen, so calls man that she's married to the non-Kohen, she's not allowed to eat Truma, not allowed to eat Chas of a Sheikh. As if you say Ishte Kugufay, just like the husband is not a kohen. So even though the wife is a bas kohen, ishte kegufam balki ishtay. So we say if the bas kohen marries a non-kohen, she's temporarily calls man she's married to the kohen, she's not allowed to eat truma. But then it says, what if the husband, the bas kohen married a Yisrael, and the husband died? So if they have children, so she's not allowed to, not allowed to eat the truma again. We treat it as if she's still connected with the dead husband. She's a bas kohen, and the husband was not a kohen. Bas kohen ksili izar. V'zera ein lo, she has no children. V'shavel beis aviyah k'nira, melechem aviyah toichel. So Rashi and Chumash quotes the drasha from the Gemara. Mi lechem v'lo kol lechem. She's allowed, she's shavel al beis aviyah k'nira. She can eat truma, but she can't eat chaz v'shaik. So you need. It's more chomer to be allowed to eat chaz v'shaik of the shlamim. You need more issues than you need for eating truma. So the Or Sameach has a Yerushalmi that he thinks doesn't read straight, and he thinks that it's a misprint. And the Yerushalmi, what it should say is that arusa, if a girl, a Yisraelis, marries a kohen. So in the days of the Gemara till the days of the Gaonim, there was a long wait between Eris and Nisuin. They would wait the whole year. There's an expression in Yiddish: if a person is very slow and it takes him forever to get something done, so he says, "Senem mayor and a mitvach." It takes him a year and a Wednesday. Where'd they get that expression from? Many Yiddish expressions are based on Gemaras, based on Tanakh. It's based on this Mishnah. The girl has Erisin. She wants to live with her husband, so he makes her wait a year and a Wednesday. The first Wednesday after the year is up, then he has to have the Nisuin. He doesn't have to wait the year. He can do the Nisuin right away. In the days of the Gaonim, they discontinued that. We don't have a long pause. We have a slight pause in between Erisin and Nisuin. Because in the days of the Gemara, it used to be a year and a Wednesday, a long pause between Erisin and Nisuin. Then the Gaonim did away with it. So it's totally not the way it used to be in the days of Tanakh. So the Rabbeinu Tam instituted that you should have some hafsaka or another between Eris and Nisuin to maintain what used to be in the days of Tanakh, in the days of the Tanoim, the days of the Gemara. So he said you should read the Kesubos in between. Or if you have a chazan who wants to sing something, Shir HaMa'alos, so the best time to sing Shir HaMa'alos is after Kriyas HaKsuba. Kriyas HaKsuba is to have a pause. So you should have more of a pause. If some rabbi wants to hold a sermon, best time to hold a sermon is after the Kriyas HaKsuba. The purpose of the Kriyas HaKsuba is to have a pause. When my first daughter got married, she married a boy who was in my shiur, but his family lived in Switzerland. When he learned in Eretz Yisrael, I think he learned in Shalavim, so he joined the army, and then the B'nai Chutz Lords are in the army, so they don't serve for so many years. So the army always encourages them, they should please leave Eretz Yisrael, so the Israelis won't notice that all the B'nai Chutz Lords are not staying as long as they are in the army. So many of them come to America. Many of them come to learn NYU. So this boy who married my daughter, his family lived in Switzerland, so there were less than 10 relatives came from the Chassan side. His parents came, and an aunt came, and his grandfather came. That's it. So the grandfather didn't speak English. He didn't speak Yiddish. He only spoke Swiss German. And most Americans don't understand Swiss German. So he couldn't, so he spoke in Ivrit. So nobody understood him. He spoke in Ivrit. So he spoke around 45 minutes. After the Kriyas HaKsuba, he was telling the yichus of the family. His father was a Chassidish Rebbe, and he was connected with other Chassidish tzaddikim. He was telling the yichus of the family for 45 minutes. That was a nice hafsaka. That was a nice hafsaka. In the days of the Gemara, if they had Eris in a year and a Wednesday before, there's a year's pause between Eris and Nisuin. So there's no shaila. Why did he say Bar Piagofen over the Kois Shal Nisuin? Even if they said Birchas Eris in a year ago, but they went to sleep 350 days in between the Eris and the Nisuin. So when they say the Nisuin ala Kos, so you got to say another Bar Piagofen. The Bar Piagofen from a year ago is not going to help now. But by us, we just said Bar Piagofen 2 minutes ago over the Kois Shal Erisin. And then you have the Kois Shal Nisuin. So right away, so what are you saying another Bar Piagofen for? So on Pesach night we have that shaila. We have Arba Koises. So on the first Kois you have to say Bar Piagofen. You're saying Kiddush. On the second Kois, it's a question, so it's a machlokes in the Rishonim. So many Sfardim do not say Bar Piagofen on the second cup of wine. The Mechaber Paskins like that. There are more Paskins for Ashkenazim that you do say, because since each Kois is a bracha ala kos, the first kos is Kiddush, second kos is Asher Yalanu, the third kos on Pesach night is Bichas Hamazon ala kos, even if you don't have a mezuman, and the fourth kos is Bichas Hashir. So on the first kos you have to say Bar Piagofen, second kos that Sfardim don't say Bar Piagofen. The third kos is of benching. So when you benching is a declaration of Hesach Hadas from eating food. So you have to say Bar Piagofen after. You can't rely on the Bar Piagofen from before. Once you say a Bracha Achrayna, the Bar Piagofen doesn't help anymore. But for the fourth kos, Bar Piagofen on the third cup should really cover the fourth cup. So that's many Svardim only say Bar Piagofen twice on Pesach night. On the first kos and on the third kos. The second and the fourth kos they don't say. Ashkenazim say even all four koses because there are different explanations. So the more popular explanation is if there were 4 brachas halakha, that's the halacha. You need a Bar Piagofen, even though it's not really needed. Mitam birchas hanenin, that's the halacha. You need a Bar Piagofen whenever you say a bracha halakha. So by the Ashkenazim, it's not so bad. You just said Bar Piagofen 2 minutes ago over the kos of Erisin. We don't wait a year at a mitvach in between Eris and Nisuin. We have one after the other. So even according to Rabbeinu Tam's introduction that you should read the Kesubos in order to have a hafsaka, how much of hafsaka, how long does it take to read the whole Kesubos? The whole purpose of reading the Kesubos is to waste time, to have a pause. The way it used to be, before the Goyim made the din, that you have to have Nisuin right away. So how much of a pause do you make? You don't have such a long pause. Some people have the practice of, some Rabbanim have the practice of reading the Kesubos very quickly, not to take up too much time. The pashtus is that defeats the whole purpose. The whole purpose of reading the Kesubos is to make a hafsaka. So I remember when there used to be a prominent rabbi in Cincinnati. His name was Rav Hershel Schachter. That's the way he used to pronounce it. He learned by Rab Chaim Moses's koilel. Rab Chaim Moses had a little koilel, And each one of them became a prominent rabbi years later. Some of them, a few of them lived in America. Rabbi Natalovich, others also. So Blazer Silver, he would read the Kesubos at a wedding. It would be a presentation, a dramatic presentation. And if someone would talk in the middle, he would stop reading the Kesubos. And then when it would be quiet, he would start from the beginning again. The whole purpose of reading the Kesubos is to have a pause. You have to make a pause. So we started to say the Or Sameach has a passage in the Yerushalmi which he thinks doesn't read straight. So he says, just like we have it in Milechem Abiyat Toichel Milechem Eloi Kol Lechem, that if a girl was a Kohenes and she married a non-Kohen and the husband dies, V'zera ein lo, she has no two children. V'shav al beis aviyah k'nureha, she returns back to her parents' home. Milechem aviyah toichel, milechem eloi kol lechem. She can eat truma, she can continue to eat truma. The husband died and she has no children from the husband. She's not related to him anymore. So she returns back. Milechem aviyah toichel, she's allowed to eat truma. But milechem eloi kol lechem, she can't eat chazav v'shoy. So the Or Sameach has the Yerushalmi, which doesn't read straight. So he thinks what it's supposed to say is that when a girl is an arusa, the Gemara had psukim that she can eat if the girl marries a kohen. The girl is not a kohenes, and she marries a kohen when she has eris, and Torah she's already permitted to eat truma. It's only b'derabbanan. We'll have to discuss why. What are the two reasons b'derabbanan that we don't permit an arusa to eat the truma? But Torah the arusa acheles b'truma, but the arusa eino acheles b'chaz of shok until the nisuin. So he claims that's another difference between arusa and the sua. If a girl who's not a bas kohen marries a kohen, she's allowed to eat truma from erisin on, but in order to eat chas v'shoik of shlamim, you have to have nisuin. There are a lot of differences between erisin and nisuin. So how exactly do you do nisuin? So that's the Ran on the first page says unclear. The Gemara never spells out explicitly. How do you do erisin? So you have kesef shtar of bia, and with the Rabbanan they prohibited bia, and then the Rambam writes kvanog kol yisrael the kaddish bekesef. The minig by the rabbinic Jews is to be mekat to choose kesef. Why? So the commentaries explain because the Karoim didn't accept Torah Shabbal Peh. And the Gemara seems to say, we'll learn the Gemara in the next daf, that Kiddushay Bia and Kiddushay Shtar are based on Torah Shabbal but Kiddushay Kesef is only known through Torah Shabbal Peh. So the Rambam says, Kvanog, Kol Yisrael the Kaddish Bekesef, meaning by the Jews, the whole Mishnah Torah is for Jews. What is he saying? Meaning for the Jews means that meaning by the rabbinic Jews who follow the Torah Shabbal Peh is we choose Badafka to be Mekadosh Bekesef because the Karoim don't accept Kiddushay Kesef. There were different brands of the Karoim. There were European Karoim and Asian Karoim and African Karoim. Each group had different shtick. And one of the things they all have in common is that none of them have Kiddushay Kesef. So the Rambam says the minig by the Jews is that we dafka do Kiddushay Kesef to demonstrate that we do subscribe to the Torah Shabbal Peh. The Rambam has such a statement by Bris Mila also. He says, he quotes a Gemara in Chulin, in the beginning of Chulin, that the moil can use whatever is sharp enough to cut the or ha'orla. It can use a knife or you can use a scissors. It would make more sense to use a scissors because you're cutting around. The way they do, they pull up the orla, then they cut it. Why don't they use scissors and cut around it? So the Rambam quotes the Gemara, can use a knife or scissors, a blade of grass, a piece of paper if it's sharp, a broken piece of glass, anything that cuts. Then the Rambam says, and the minig by the Jews is that you use a knife. What do you mean the minig by the Jews as opposed to the Muslims? Minig by whom? No, it means the minig by the rabbinic Jews, because the Karaites don't accept Torah Shabbal Peh. So the Karaites, and they had to make up their own Torah Shebal Peh, because not everything is explicit. So they quoted a pasuk when Bnei Yisrael crossed over the Yarden into Eretz Yisrael, and they went to the city Gilgal. So there was a mass bris milah. 40 years earlier, before Yetzias Mitzrayim, there was a mass bris milah, because many people in Mitzrayim didn't perform bris milah. So the din is kol or lo yechol bo. No one is allowed to eat Korban Pesach if he's not gemalt. So they had a mass bris milah for all the people. Then, during the 40 years of traveling in the Midbar, it says only Shevet Levi practiced bris milah. All the other Shvatim were afraid because the weather conditions were such that there was a slight sakana on the baby to perform a bris milah. So the Chasam Sofer is bothered with the kasha. They had an Orthodox rabbi there, Moshe Rabbeinu. So he allows all the Shvatim not to perform bris milah, means that it's a suffix sakana. So how does he allow Shevet Levi, yes, to perform bris milah? They're putting the baby's life in sakana. And it means that it's not a sakana. So he should insist that the others should perform the bris milah. So what's going on? So the Chasam Sofer asks the kasha in the Tshuvas, and he gives a doichik answer. So others say the answer is pashut. We have a klal. Rab Chaim Ozer has a tshuva where he quotes many classical poskim say la halacha like this. If you have a suffix hakana that's nowhere near 50-50, nowhere near 50-50. So what's the din? Does it have a din of a suffix hakana or not? Let's say there are a lot of Americans, a lot of British students learning in Eretz Yisrael and yeshivas. So then when there's a war, so you have hundreds of people are leaving Eretz Yisrael to go back to Chutz La'aretz because it's dangerous. Hundreds of people are coming from Chutz La'aretz to give support in Eretz Yisrael. So who's right and who's wrong? If there's a sakana, you're not allowed to put yourself into a sakana. All right, so people are serving in the army. That's when the other people go. They're not serving. They just want to unite with the Jewish people. You're not allowed to put yourself into a makam sakana. So the answer is the suffix sakana is nowhere near 50-50. Half of the people in Israel are going to get killed. Way less than half the people. The last war, there were so many casualties. It's terrible. But normally, it's nowhere near 50-50. So that's the klal. Whenever you have a suffix sakana that's nowhere near 50-50, it's up to the patient, it's up to the person whose life is in danger to determine if he's nervous, then it's called the suffix sakana. If he's not nervous, then it's not called the suffix sakana. So that's what happened in the Midbar. All the other Shvatim were nervous. So if they're nervous, the children are only 8 days old. So you can't ask the child, are you nervous? So the parents are responsible for the good health of the children. So if the parents are nervous, so for them it's called the suffix sakana. So they're not allowed to do the bris milah. And Shevet Levi had bitochen. They were not nervous. Nowhere near 50-50 at all. And no one died. No one died from all the whole Shevet Levi. No one died. So the psukim say that after 40 years in the midbar, nobody but Shevet Levi, Brischi and Soro, only Shevet Levi observed bris milah. The others didn't observe bris milah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Yeshua ben Nun, Kach lecha charvos tzurim shu molez b'nei Yisrael shenis. You have to make a national bris milah because so many people from all the Shvatim didn't perform bris milah. So what does that mean? Kach lecha charvos tzurim. How do you translate charvos tzurim? So the Karaites made up their own drasha with their own Torah Shebal Peh. You have to use the scissors. Charvos tzurim means two knives, one cuts against the other. You're only yotze bris milah if you use the scissors. You're not yotze if you use a knife. So that's what the Rambam quotes. The Gemara can use a scissors, he can use a knife, he can use a blade of grass or a broken piece of glass or whatever cuts. But the minig by the rabbinic Jews, the minig by the Jews doesn't mean that as opposed to the Muslims. As opposed to the Karaites. The Rambam lived among the Karaites in Egypt. He made takonis against the Karaites. The minig among the Karaites, the practice is that they dafka use the scissors. So the Rambam says, minig by us is Yadavka don't use the scissors to demonstrate that we accept the Torah Shebal Peh. So there's several different opinions what constitutes Nisuin. It's not clear. The Ran on the first daf points out. It's unclear how do you do Nisuin. You have to do, the gist of it is you have to do Hachnasa L'Rishusai. You don't need another kinyan. The woman is an Eseshish, Shalob Beis HaBaal. And when you do Hachnasa L'Rishusai, then she becomes Beis HaZuishta. she becomes a Nesua. How do you do Achnasa L'Rishusa? So the one opinion is what the Ramah quotes in the end of Yeridei in Hilchos Avelis, that it's the Badeken. The Badeken is the Nisuin. Another opinion, the Ramah quotes in Even Ezer, that standing under the chuppah constitutes a Nisuin. Why does that constitute standing under the canopy of marriage, canopy of love? How does that constitute Nisuin? So the two shittas in Shulchan Aruch, what is accomplished by the canopy? So if you look on the side of the page in the big Shulchan Aruch Even Ezer, they have a commentary by the rabbi from Buchach, the Buchach Rav. It's called Eze Mikodesh. So he says they always used to have 4 poles and have a canopy on top. So the 4 poles are what we would call in Hilchos Shabbos and Erevin at Tzuras HaPesach. So if you have Kohen B'Kan Al Gabeim, you make an Erev to be allowed to carry. So if you have Kohen B'Kan 2 mezuzahs and a mashkaf on top, that's a Tzuras HaPesach. So you go from the first pole to the second, to the third, to the fourth, and back to the first. So you have a Tzuras HaPesach. So Tzuras HaPesach, like a separate room. The Chosan Kala entered into the separate room, L'Shem Nisuin. That's called Hachnasa L'Rishusa. It's Yodua Maril Diskin. He used to be the rabbi in Brisk, and then the government was out to arrest him for some ridiculous story. Not ridiculous, he followed what the halacha says. You're not allowed to be choshed b'ksherim. So he didn't want to give someone over to the police. So he had to run away to Eretz Yisrael. So they have a lot of hayros, a lot of chidushim. So he came up with this chidush that in order that it should be considered hachnasa l'rishusai, the chosen has to rent a room. Has to rent the yichud room, and he has to rent the chuppah room. The chuppah room is the area that's enclosed in the 4 Tzuras HaPesachs. And the Eze Mikodesh on the side of the page in the Shulchan Aruch points out that there's a din regarding Tzuras HaPesach. It's only considered like a mechitzu of Yikana Mikan, Yikana Al Gabeim. You have to have, we're makel even if you have a string on top. You have to have a string. You don't really need the cloth, according to this opinion. You don't need the whole canopy. You have to have a string that goes from pole 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 back to 1. It has to be Al Gabeim. So the practice in Europe used to be for many years, they would use the parochas from the shul. In the days of the Gemara, the parochas had the status of Tashmishi Kedusha, because the practice used to be they didn't have a mappo on the shulchan. So when they would learn Kriyas HaTorah, they would take down the parochas. By us, you can't take down the parochas. It's hung up in such a way that it's hard. You have to climb up. You have to get a ladder. It's a whole story. But in the days of the Gemara, every day, 3 days a week, they would take down the parochas, put it on the shulchan, then they would hang it back up. So because they would put the Sefer Torah directly on the parochas, on top of the shulchan, so the parochas had the status of Tashmishi Kedusha. So if you're chilly, you're not allowed to warm yourself in the parochas. And the Gemara has a din in Beitza, at the end of the first parak, you're not allowed to make curtains that are from shatnez. Why? People don't wear curtains as clothing. Shatnez is also bano. It's not also bano. You can sell shatnez, mutabano. It's also belevisha, also b'ha'alo. It's halo and levisha. So the Gemara says sometimes if a person is chilly, he'll stand near the curtain and he'll wrap himself in the curtain. So that's why the Gemara says you're not allowed to make curtains from shatnez because somebody may warm himself. But the parochas is Tashmishi Kedusha in the days of the Gemara, so you're allowed to make it from shatnez. So in America, they told us years ago, I don't know if they changed it, if your shul orders a parochas, they don't give you any instructions. I think they said 85% of the time they will make the parochas with shatnez. That's a question today, because today we never take the parochas down to put it on the shulchan, to put the Sefer Torah on. The parochas is really tashmish, ditashmish. The Sefer Torah is sitting in the Aron Kodesh. The Aron Kodesh is tashmishi kedusha, and the parochas covers up the Aron Kodesh. That's twice removed from the Sefer Torah. So tashmish, the tashmish does not have a din of tashmishi kedusha. So that's why for many years they used to use the parochas for the chuppah. If it would be like in the days of the Gemara, that it's a tashmishi kedusha, you wouldn't be allowed to use it for your own personal purposes. So they used to use the parochas. So that's why many old parochas used to have a metal ring in the corner, a metal circle ring, so that to be able to put the poles in. So the Eizem Mikodesh on the side of the page in the big Shulchan Aruch complains there is no kon al gabeim. That's a kon min atzad. If you have a ring around the pole and the beged, the cloth of the pareches, is not on top of the pole, it's a quarter of an inch away from the pole. So it's not a good tzuras ha-pesach. So that's why there are old pareches from Europe where they corrected it. You see a pareches, rectangular shape, and there's a diagonal slit in the four corners. Why'd they make a hole in the parecha, a diagonal slit? To put the pole there. So you have the cloth goes from on top of the first pole to the second, to the third, to the fourth, and back again. So you really don't need the rest of the cloth. You could have put a string to have a tzuras ha-pesach. That's one shita. That's the Eizem Mikodesh and the big Shulchan Aruch. Others say no, that the pareches has to be made from cloth. It's really the same as the badek, and a farasta kanafecha ala masecha. Like by the Sfardim and by the Yekes, they have the practice that they put a talus on top of the chas and kala. So put a talus was fine years ago when they would decide a week before the wedding when they're going to get married. So the girl went to mikveh, and they invite all the people from the town, and they set aside the day for the wedding. But today, you have to book tickets. People come from the other side of the globe. They come from distances, so you have to book plane tickets in advance. You have to book a caterer. You have to book musicians. You have to book people to make a wedding. So you can't just decide a week before. So a lot of times it turns out that Kala can't go to mikveh before. You can't always calculate properly. So many times we cannot put a talus on top of the chas and kala. They're standing together until if the girl didn't go to mikveh, you're not allowed to do that. So that's why they have the cloth on top. So that's two different, totally different explanations. What's the chuppah all about? Before the summer, there was a wedding in Marina del Rey, and the wedding was outside, and the place where the chuppah was, there was no cloth on top. It was plastic on top. There was no cloth. So Rabbi Leibowitz, I think, was Masada Kedushin. I forgot already. So there was a table under the chuppah where they put the bottle of wine and the cup and the ksuba and everything. So he discreetly, no, he wasn't Masada Kedushin because he was walking around. So he got 4 boys to hold the poles, and he took off the tablecloth, and the 4 boys were holding up the tablecloth. There was a chuppah for tzuras ha-pesach. There was with the plastic, with the metal poles on the plastic, but there was no cloth. So you had boys. I think there were more than 4 because it was a big cloth. It was a big area. So you had a couple of boys hold the cloth to satisfy the other opinion that constitutes nisuin. Then the Rambam's opinion is based on the Gemara. You need chuppah haruya lebiyah. So the chuppah, you can't say under the canopy. Everybody's standing there. So you have to have a private room. And we're choshesh for the Rambam's opinion. So that's why the Maharil says the chas and kala should rush from the chuppah to the cheder hayichud. Meritzim is a chas and sakala, the cheder hayichud, and the Magen Avraham quotes it, and Eben Ezer, the Beis Shmuel quotes it. You shouldn't have any hafsaka. It's not right. It's really not right. By some communities, they sing Shir Amalos. After the chuppah is all over, they sing Shir Amalos before the chas and kala go to the yichud room. So it says you should rush the chas and kala. And usually everybody's kissing everybody else under the chuppah, and the photographer is taking a lot of pictures. That's all Keneged Adin. You're supposed to go, because you said the bracha is under the chuppah, and you want to be choshesh for the Rambam's opinion that the yichud haroy lebiyah is the nisuin. So you shouldn't talk. You should rush as quickly as possible. You have to run, but they should rush the chas and kala, and they shouldn't spend a lot of time in between. And then there's a Vilna Gaon shita is that when they go home, when the chas and kala go home for the night, that's the nisuin. So there are different opinions, and we do all of the above. We do the badeken, and we have the chuppah with the tzuras ha-pesach, and with the cloth on top of rasa kanafecha la-masecha, and by the Sfardim they have a talus, and then you have the yichud, which should be done as soon as possible, right after the chuppah, right after the brachas under the chuppah, and then they go home later. So this is the Erisin and the Nisan. Okay, this is an introduction. Tomorrow you'll continue learning. Have Hatzlacha.